most arguments about what a text means are a shambles. So somebody half remembers a line, somebody else gets loud, 3 people talk at once, and at the end of it, everyone believes exactly what they believed going in. And somewhere in the middle of all that, somebody says the words this whole talk is about. Well, what it actually says is this. What kind of text people appeal to? A constitution, a scripture, a contract, a treaty, a founding charter. It can be small and domestic too, like a letter somebody's grandmother left behind and the family can't agree on what she meant by it. Doesn't matter which, same argument, same shambles. But we don't have to do it that way. You can take that same disagreement and run it through a university, and it turns into something else. It gets disciplined, for one thing. You have to engage with what people have actually argued. Not the convenient version of them you keep in your head, but the real thing on the page. So you quote, you bring in the commentary tradition, the history of how this text has been read, whatever documents happens to survive. And I'd note in passing that some of those survived because somebody cared enough to protect them, and some of them survived by pure, dumb luck. And it's not always easy to tell which is which. So that's real and that's better. But I want you to notice what else is going on in that room where people argue about the text. So if you've read more, you find evidence for your position faster. That's not a virtue, that's an inventory. If you're an organized person, your work looks more rigorous and more conclusive than the work of the messy ones. And it might be, but looking it and being it aren't the same thing. If you write well, you persuade more people than someone who writes badly. And that may have nothing whatsoever to do with whether you write. And then there's the room itself. So you show up, you display the full plumage, the titles, the honors, the appointments. And ideally, you don't do that yourself, because that's awkward. Ideally, a colleague introduces you and does it on your behalf, which is far more elegant. So you mention the institutions. You let it be understood, without ever quite saying it, that you have been admitted, that you're inside this conversation and you carry weight in it. And then you mention, sort of in passing, where you've been and what you've done and who you did it with. Look, none of that is fraud. Most of it is even useful. There's a reason we have credentials. But I do want us to see it clearly. All of that is persuasion, and it's sitting on top of the argument. It is not the argument. So let's go after the actual argument. Because the serious version of this project says we have methods. Methods produce measures, and if we've got measures, we ought to be able to write down criteria that rank one reading above another. And at the very least, throw out the obvious nonsense. All right, let's write some criteria down. I've got 6, and I've got to say up front that they don't rescue us. But we have to have them in hand first to see it. So here's the first one. And it's the honest one nobody likes saying out loud. A reading is more credible if most of the people I respect prefer it. That's it. That's the criterion. And before anybody objects, everybody uses this. You have to. Nobody has the time or the mental room to independently evaluate every possible interpretation of anything. So we don't. We walk in having already been pointed towards some readings and steered away from others. And in my experience, the people with genuinely independent minds are the ones self-aware enough to admit they do it too. Now, you can do one better than that. Instead of taking somebody's word for who's worth reading, you go look at the reader yourself. And honestly, this is already how we all think. If a guy's lazy, or dishonest, or just not that sharp, you don't expect much from his reading of anything. A contract, a poem, a text message. He might surprise you once, but probably won't. Whereas somebody capable and honest, who actually wants the truth and is still willing to learn at 60, who's careful, who pays attention, yeah, you expect something from that person. You might be wrong, people let you down, or you misjudged them going in, which happens more often, but it isn't a crazy bet. And this is the part that makes people uncomfortable, so let me say it plainly. If you refuse to evaluate the person, if you insist on the text alone, pure argument against argument, it usually gets much harder to explain why one reading is better than another. And harder still to convince anybody else of it. Here's a third one, and this one I think is just true. A good reading has to account for the whole text. Because give me 5 well-chosen verses and I will find you anything you want in there. And I'll argue for it beautifully. But whatever I've just done, it isn't an interpretation of the text. So if your reading covers one section and mine covers that same section plus more, mine wins. And notice that one doesn't care who either of us is. 4th criterion, know the text. So if you are mixing up the names and places and who did what to whom, you're out. And notice you can fix that one. Correct a single error and the reading is measurably better than it was. The 5th criterion. Be coherent. Don't contradict on page 11 what you claimed on page 4. And criterion 6. Keep it lean. The fewer assumptions you have to haul in from outside the text, the better. So, okay, those are decent criteria. They genuinely do impose some order on the mess. But look at what we just bought ourselves. Start with, is the criterion even well formulated? And then, how should we interpret the criterion? Because the criterion is a text now too. We are right back where we started, one floor up. Where does its authority come from anyway? Is it coming out of the text itself or from somewhere outside the text? And if it's from outside, what exactly does that mean for the whole project? And then the criteria collide. That's the real trouble. Say your reading has no factual errors in it, but it only covers half the text. And mine covers the whole thing, but I got some things wrong. Accuracy says you win. Completeness says I win. So now what? Now we need a criterion for ranking the criteria. And you can see the road we're on. Even if two people agree on which criteria to use and agree on how to rank them, they can still walk away disagreeing about what those criteria yield. It happens constantly. Imagine really good work. Rigorous, mature, careful, written by serious people with real integrity, honestly trying to get at the truth. Not a comment section, but the good stuff. Even there, texts stay ambiguous. They stay inconsistent. They stay incomplete. That doesn't go away because you were careful. And on top of it, you've got everything human. What we are capable of, what we are not, and how much of what we think we know, we simply took on someone else's say-so. Which means there is always another move available to you, always. You can cite a different passage. You can take the passage they just cited and put it in a slightly different context. You can grant it a little less weight than they did. You can move the emphasis 2 inches to the left, and you can keep doing that back and forth, for as long as you feel like doing it. Now, I'll grant this much. If somebody's dug in and refusing to hear you, a bigger and more coherent thicket of evidence does make it harder for them to get out. That's real. Doing the work costs your opponent something. But they can still get out. And here's what I keep sitting with. They can get out on perfectly respectable grounds. Real footing in the text, real footing in the sources, ordinary rules of inference. Nothing shabby about it. So, can these criteria help? Sure. They'll clean up your thinking and they'll catch the worst nonsense. They just can't do the one thing we actually wanted them for, which was to end the argument. The thicket gets thicker, the exit never quite closes.